Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. 911 dispatchers, what has been your most creepy/unnerving call? I had a friend who worked as a 911 dispatcher, and he always said the worst call he ever had was a 20-year-old kid who committed suicide by mixing a bunch of chemicals together in his car to produce hydrogen sulfide gas. He said that the most unnerving part was hearing him calmly listing off the chemicals, the type of gas produced, and the effects of hydrogen sulfide on the body, namely the almost instant death it causes at high concentrations. He ended the call by providing the address of the parking lot he was in and saying that nobody should approach the vehicle without hazmat equipment. Apparently after that there was a whooshing sound as he dumped the last chemical into the mix, and then the line went dead silent aside for a quiet fizzing noise. I know that call screwed him up because he almost never talks about stuff that happens to him on the job. He quit a few months later to go into construction management, and frankly I can't blame him. When I was 9 my mom died. My brother, 10.5, and I were home alone with her. Our dad had died 3 years earlier. She had a massive heart attack. My brother called 911 and they walked us through getting her off the bed and onto the floor so that my brother could attempt CPR. When he was ready, he gave me the phone, on speaker, and told me to turn around and face the wall so I didn't have to watch. I vividly remember sobbing to the dispatcher, "Please, you don't understand, this is my last parent. You have to do something." The dispatcher attended my mother's funeral and left the field right after. My brother is a trauma surgeon, I'm in nursing school, very cataclysmic situation for all involved. Suicide or homicide calls always get my hair standing on end. I've taken a few of both. It's always eerie how callers start off relatively calm, then you notice them get more and more emotional and hysterical as the weight of what they've just witnessed sets in. I have taken calls from parents screaming at their dead child and sobbing asking why they did it. It's a creepy feeling knowing that they're standing there screaming at a dead body that's in God knows what kind of condition. I've talked to people who were dying and people who had just watched their loved ones die in violent ways, but the ones that get me are the ones that could have been stopped. A guy who didn't report a domestic in a high-rise for 60 minutes until he saw a girl hurtle past his window on the way to the ground below. A woman whose son said he was going to jump off a bridge. She drove to the bridge she thought he'd go to, and sure enough there he was. She didn't want to block traffic so she drove to the other side to pull over. He jumped before she could run back. Honestly, the call that caused me the absolute most grief was simply an elderly man who woke up to find his wife deceased next to him, having died in her sleep overnight. I'll never forget the pain in his voice. It's weird because there wasn't any crime, any violence, any victim really. He just clearly really loved her and wasn't ready for her to go. I choke up a little thinking about it years later. A woman called in once, saying she had already swallowed a massive amount of pills, later found it was over 100 oxycodone, about 40 Xanax, and a mix of about 20 other pills, and was okay with dying. She told me not to send any help, and that she was fine. Just wanted someone to talk to her until she passed. She then stated if I sent any people, and if she heard any sirens or knocks on her door, she would light herself on fire as she had already doused herself in lighter fluid. At my job, there is no choice to not send help. I have to enter a call. So I did. How the field handles it themselves, given the information I've provided, is up to them. As units were heading there I was speaking to her, listening to her continuously flicking her lighter knowing at any moment she could set herself ablaze. After about 4 minutes, which felt like an eternity, she asks if I sent people to her. To which I replied that she had called 911 and 911 was there to help her. I didn't want her to harm herself, I cared about her, and she could get the help she needed. She then asked again, "Did you send people here?" I froze, not knowing what to say. Then, after a few seconds of silence, she eerily chuckled, said I knew you would. And that's okay. I forgive you. Please forgive me. Then proceeded to set herself on fire. I listened to her blood-curdling screams as she burned. I still hear that lighter flicking sometimes. I can still hear her chuckle. I still hear her burning screams. I recently had an open line 911 call, where the person that called was the victim of a home invasion. He was smart enough to call 911 and hide the phone so we could hear everything that was going on. I heard him begging for someone to just take the money and leave. "Please don't kill me, I'm an old man. And I heard another male voice in the background swearing, telling him he was going to shoot him in the face. It was the longest phone call of my life. I thought for sure I was going to hear this poor guy get murdered on the line. I was afraid to say anything because I didn't want the suspect to know or hear that the victim had called. Thankfully our officers got there fairly quickly, surrounded the building and caught the guy trying to go out a back window. He got arrested and the old man survived with only minor injuries from being punched several times. Apparently the suspect was super high and was a friend of a caretaker of the elderly person. The caretaker had mentioned the old man had money hidden in the house. Back in the day when my dad was a police officer, different counties didn't use the same 10 codes, E10 to 4, 10 to 9, etc. This came into play when he was handling a minor traffic accident in an intersection right on the border of our county and the next one over. Literally the line runs down the middle of the street. My dad's on the scene immediately, and radios into our county saying he's handling an accident at the intersection. He then switches over to the other county's frequency and says he's handling a minor accident and they should send someone out. Except he gave the 10 code for a minor collision. Almost immediately he hears sirens start up from every direction, moving towards him fast. First couple cars come flying into the intersection and officers roll out of their cars, guns drawn, and my dad's like, "Yo, WTF?" One officer walks up to my dad like, "What happened?" and my dad's like, "It's a fender bender like I said." Turns out the 10 code for a fender bender in our county is the send in the cavalry because they're shooting everybody over here, distress call for theirs. Many changes were made. Another one that stays with me was the man who called in. It was the anniversary of his adult son having hanged himself. He'd now come home to find his wife had done the same. That date is always going to be a black day for him. When I got a call from a 6-year-old who got home from school and laid down to take a nap with his dad never woke up. The kid was so calm when calling, it broke my heart. I ended up leaving dispatch shortly after. I was good at compartmentalizing the job for the year I was doing it, but it would have broken me in the long run. Not me, but my grandma. I was sitting in the dispatch office, very small one, only 2 dispatchers including my grandma, but she put out a dispatch that there was a gunshot from my best friend's address. My heart sank to my stomach and broke later that day. He committed suicide. During the academy, a radio call recording was played. A man had just shot his wife and from of his children, 2 kids under 7 years old. The dispatcher hears him calmly say he killed his wife and children, crying in the background. Gurgling is heard and he tells the dispatcher to please wait. A gunshot is heard and the poor kids let out blood-curdling screams. The first bullet didn't kill her and he heard her struggling to breathe and shot her again. She died. He gave up easily, and only good thing is the kids were not shot or physically harmed. Christmas night. 911 call with crying child on the other end. A neighbor had ran her car over her mom during a domestic. The mom crawled to the porch bleeding and the child saw the car coming back. I had her hide quietly in a closet with a cordless phone. The 10-year-old child was crying and screamed that she hated Christmas. She was afraid of the police when they got there. I kept her on the phone until she felt safe enough to give the phone to an officer. I almost fainted after that call was over. Had nightmares for a while. Not a dispatcher but to handle radio communications for the Coast Guard. One night I was on the radio and got a call from an 11-year-old kid whose boat had started to sink. He was out with his dad and 6-year-old brother. They had been hit by another boat and his father got knocked unconscious. I remember the entire conversation up until the radio had gone underwater. They ended up finding his dad floating on his back alive, but the 2 boys didn't make it. That one really effed with me because my 2 littlest brothers were around the same age as the youngest. My wife has been a dispatcher for over 10 years. To add to the insanity of the job, in her case, 1, you're just there to handle things until help arrives. You'll have to make connections and do your own research to find out what happened, ESP since. 2, many cops and your management can view you as just a secretary, etc. Also, she doesn't share a building with cops, firefighters, EMTs. 3, if you have a particularly disturbing call, or any call, management, who may or may not be able to do your job, can keep replaying the recording to you, as they nitpick. 4, you don't get a break if your caller shoots themselves in the neck. Once help arrives, you're simply expected to disconnect and keep working. The dispatchers in my state are trying to be categorized whereas they can retire in 25 years, due to the stress of the job. No luck, so far. Probably the guy that called screaming that his friend abandoned him to die and that he could feel it coming because he had parasites eating him from the inside. He was coded a 10 to 96, a caller with some mental instability, and I had to try and calm him down while the deputies approached him. I really hope he received the help that he needed and is doing better now. Not a dispatcher. I accidentally called 911 when I was working at Staples. You had to hit 9 to dial out of the store and the number was a 1 to 1800 number, so you can guess what happened. Anyway, I yelled at the operator we didn't get the paper. And about 3 squad cars showed up in seconds. I asked a friend this. She worked in it 20 plus years and she's an absolute sweet little lady. She told me this one time a neighbor called them to say the apartment building was on fire and there were kids still inside sleeping in the neighboring apartment, but they didn't want to bother checking the door or waking them up not to upset the parents, who were at work. All 6 kids and 2 dogs died that day. She expressed how people are really unwilling to help someone in need when calling sometimes, and it breaks her soul every time. A woman called me, saying she was going to kill herself. She was gassing herself. Gave me her name and address, then said she was just going to lie down and go to sleep. And stopped responding to me. I kept the line open, trying to get her to speak to me, and eventually heard officers forcing their way in to find our body. I guess she just wanted someone to find our body. My family member is a long-time first responder, and retired into doing dispatch. He heard the address, someone else was taking the call, and realized it was his daughter's house. He rushed over there just in time to see them wheeling her body out. Overdose. 5 months later, he was called to his ex-wife's place because his grandson, son of the daughter who recently passed, had his door locked, lights on, but wasn't responding to his grandma. He broke the door down and found him deceased in bed. Overdose. He's very stoic after years of all sorts of traumatic situations, but my heart hurts whenever I think of what all of this must have felt like. Like sand through your fingers. Not a dispatcher myself, but I just wanted to come here to say all of you dispatchers are unsung heroes. You can somehow stay professional when getting yelled at and stay calm when you have a caller hysterical on the other end of the line and help talk them through. Then you go home at the end of your shift and have to replay what you've heard over and over a lot of the time without any mental health support of your own. Never forget, you are our heroes that help us through our darkest days, and heroes sometimes need a little help too. Reach out to someone if you need it. Hold strong and keep being awesome. The Singing Suicide Man. When I first started, every once in a while we'd get a call from an untraceable number. The man on the other end would be sobbing, just the most heart-wrenching sobs you've ever heard. After a second or two, he'd start singing a song about suicide. He'd interrupt himself every few words with another sob, and every time I tried to ask him a question, he'd loudly break into the chorus, wailing about how suicide is painless. I learned years later that he was singing the theme song from Moss H, but it was so off-tune and filled with wails of misery that it was completely unrecognizable. Through random chance, I got most of the Singing Suicide Man's calls. We can't disconnect from calls where we believe someone may be hurt without dispatching help. I couldn't dispatch help because he wouldn't talk to me. I had to sit there, utterly helpless, while a suicidal man sobbed and sang to me about how much he wanted to kill himself. Everyone has a kind of call that they can't handle. I can handle the calls where I have to give CPR instructions over the phone. I can handle parents panicking because their child is severely injured. I can handle someone screaming because they found their parent dead. I have a history of severe depression, and I've been actively suicidal. I can't handle suicidal callers. I know exactly what it feels like, and suicidal callers where you are forced to listen, utterly helpless, sure that any second you're going to hear a gunshot on the other end? That's a room in hell custom made for me. My mom is a 911 dispatcher. Early on, she said one Christmas Eve while working she got a call from an elderly lady whose husband had just collapsed and died from a heart attack, and in the background Alvin and the Chipmunks Christmas music was playing on blast. The lady was screaming and crying and begging for her husband to wake up, but my mom could hear his gurgling in his last breaths. She doesn't listen to or watch Alvin and the Chipmunks since. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.